Hey everybody, my name is Annie Thomas and welcome to video 5.2 of the My Moment video series on the coping and building strength track. Thanks for being here. And yeah, today we are going to kind of build on an idea that we talked about last time, which is this idea of not doing the hardest thing every time. And we're going to talk about how we can do an experiment in our own lives with trying to have a whole week of not doing the hardest thing. I like this a lot because sometimes for me, when I'm trying to do something new or whatever, it's tough for me to do it indefinitely. And I need a little bit of time to be able to say, is this working for me? Was it weird? I don't know. And to have kind of a definite start and stop to it. So that's why I think that having a week of just trying to um, choose to not do the hardest thing the whole week, just as a consistent getting into that groove and looking for not for what the hardest thing is and what an easier thing might be, with the intention of only doing that for a week. For me, that seems a lot more doable than just having this fear of developing a way of approaching life that's just kind of lackadaisical or lazy. Because I always kind of think that I'm being lazy. And so it's difficult for me. My boss, my old boss that I've talked about before, who had a whole year of choosing not to do the hardest thing, such a driven person, such an amazing person. And it was so inspirational watching her that year decide over and over and over again not to do the hardest thing. And she didn't ever get anywhere close to anything resembling a lazy person. That just never, ever happened. But I know for me, I get worried about that. So if you're like me, not doing the hardest thing for a week, it's kind of freeing and easier. So how do we do this? It seems like it would just be easy to just not do the hardest thing. But weirdly enough, it's kind of hard because I have trained myself for such a long time to what's the hardest thing? What's the most excellent thing? What's the best thing? Do that and do it more and do it the best. And so it can be really hard to get myself into a place where I'm even recognizing where there are places I can do something in an easier way and feeling okay about doing that. So what I'm going to suggest is actually kind of a 3-week process. And the first week, we're just going to prepare. We're just going to get ready to have this week of not the hardest thing. And the first thing we're going to do to prepare is just to notice our choices and acknowledge that there might have been an easier one and look for what that easier one might have been. So just notice, okay, I'm going to do this tonight. I am choosing to make dinner completely from scratch. But I acknowledge I also had a frozen pizza and I could have just thrown that in. So just acknowledging it to start with. And then start getting ready for easier. Get some frozen pizzas to put in the freezer, basically. Get paper plates. I really liked this idea. Schedule what I call a potluck meeting, which is where you don't get an agenda ready if you're the agenda preparer, but you just ask everyone who's coming to the meeting to bring one thing they'd like to talk about, and that's what the meeting will be. So just do a potluck meeting where everybody brings their own thing. And then I have a weird number of like gift cards and stuff around the house, like for Starbucks or whatever. And I realized that I could just like cash in my doing it easier chips sometimes if I just gathered all those up and then let myself go grab coffee in the morning instead of making it, that kind of thing. So and look for even fun ways that your whole family could do something cool together that's easier. For example, instead of having dinner like that you make or whatever, let your kids go to the store with you and pick out 5 boxes of cereal from the cereal bar and just have a cereal bar for dinner one night. Those kinds of easy things. So look for what can I do to prepare to make life easy next week. And it does, I will admit right off the bat, like preparing does seem to take some of the easy out of it. But it is weird that sometimes the hardest stuff, it may take a lot of preparation, but it also, sometimes I might be doing the hardest thing because I just felt too overwhelmed to do things that would have made it easier beforehand. So that's kind of a weird thing to think about, but sometimes I'm doing the hardest thing because it was a lot to even think about how it was the easiest thing at hand, in the sense that I was the thing that my mind went first to, again, because I've trained it that way. And I haven't prepared my life all the time to do things in an easier way. And so when it comes down to it, sometimes I've created a world in which the hardest thing is the accessible thing, the thing I can do. So in this week, we're just going to prepare and make easy things more accessible. How can I make an easy choice accessible to me? And then let yourself laugh at the things you do to make things harder. I once started doing this whole video series, just for the fun of it during the pandemic, called Make It Harder Monday, because I realized I was doing all of these things that were just like making my life ridiculously harder. Like I thought it would be super cool to have a list of what was in every freezer, on the front. And then, I got the clipboards and the little magnetic thing. And I like went through and reorganized all the freezers. And, and we're in Alaska, like our freezers are, next level. And so I had them, and then I had everything organized and like grouped together. And it was beautiful. And then I had to try to train my family and even myself to like update the list every time anybody moved anything. And as soon as anyone moved anything and didn't, then it was all messed up. And, it was a mess. And it was so hard. Oh my gosh, it was so hard. And it definitely was not better than just digging through the freezer to try to see what we had. And I'm sure that out there somewhere, one of you has an incredible system that actually does make it easier. But my way, it just made it so much harder. It was just laughable. And my entire family and I laughed about how much time I spent in this endeavor that just made our lives much harder. So notice where sometimes we make life harder. I also acknowledge that I'm kind of like high maintenance in some areas. Like there are some things that I want just so, and making them just so is like way harder. And that's okay. I've kind of accepted that about myself in some areas where I'm not making it harder to do the best or to try to achieve perfection, but sometimes I'm doing something that's harder because that's what makes me feel safe. So notice those places too. Like, where are some areas where it's okay to leave things hard and where it makes you feel safer to do them in a harder way. So this first week is just about preparing and noticing. Then I would say next week is give it a try. And if you can, find a buddy to do this with. Find someone that you can every day say, here's the choices that I made that were easier. I couldn't think of an easier one for this, but this felt really hard. Or I did think of an easier one for this, but I realized it made me feel too anxious to do it. So I just did it my old way. And that was what was best for me. So someone you can just talk about it and go back and forth with. And again, just put a lot of laughter in it, because it's funny. It's funny how hard we struggle to make everything wonderful. And so sometimes that just gets in the way of things actually being wonderful. And it's just us. It's just this crazy, funny thing about being human. So someone you can have camaraderie with, someone you can have fun with. And if not, just make your own notes. And you can always feel free to email me at althomas7@alaska.edu if you want to share a story about I did this or whatever. So I'll always be your buddy. But yeah, so after you get done with your week of just trying really hard to not trying really hard, say, I can't even like that. This is how bad I am. And I can't even say that without trying really hard, without allowing yourself to not choose the hardest thing. That next week, just let yourself sit with it. Just kind of think about, how did that feel? And did you like it? Did it make life easier? Was it more stressful? And were there any little glimmers, any little bright spots where you're like, that felt like a lifeline. Like that was really good. That could really help me out. And where were the areas that were like, oh no, this will drown me. I can't do it. This is terrible. So what worked for you and what didn't? And how much you want to go forward in the future, given what you noticed. So yeah, we're all in process here. This is just a never ending experiment of being human. And I'm glad we can do it together. Thanks so much for joining me today. Have a great day. See you next time.